So, 1979, Alien. Is this a slasher movie in space or a haunted house movie in space or a little bit of both?
Well, Ridley Scott said that he was very influenced by Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And I think I've read that he insisted that everybody watch that movie before he did, before they started production on Alien. To the extent that we consider Texas Chainsaw Massacre a slasher movie, then I guess Alien is as well. But he also said he was very influenced by 2001 and by Star Wars, surprisingly. And it's some very
Right, for the space stuff.
right. But he also referred to it as an old dark house movie in outer space, which is very much in keeping with some of the stuff that we've been talking about over the past number of episodes. And you can see that too. I mean, it really does feel like a mansion or a castle that they're all creeping around. Those scenes that when Harry Dean Stanton is walking through those chambers looking for the cat, and there's like chains hanging from and water dripping from above. It's all almost like he's walking through a dungeon or almost like a torture chamber.
Yeah.
So that would be in keeping with the sort of gothic roots of the old dark house genre. So it is kind of a slasher movie in the sense that, like a body count movie, it's one person being picked off after the other by some unseen force, which is,
Yeah.
similar to the premise that they have in a lot of old dark house movies, and also in the Giallo body count type movies that Dario Argento and people like that would do. But it also, one of the things that I feel is very strong in it, and I don't know if this is because Dan O'Bannon or Ridley Scott were particularly interested in H.P. Lovecraft. H.R. Giger might have been. But this is very much a Lovecraftian story. The world and the environment that it creates is very Lovecraftian. As a matter of fact, I haven't read this in years. This is my copy of At the Mountains of Madness, which is one of Lovecraft's most famous books. And I realized in looking over the synopsis today of the plot, it's very similar in a way to Alien. And also the approach that Ridley Scott took in keeping so much of it unseen, right? A lot of shadow, a lot of smoke obscuring our vision of what's going on, a lot of rapid cutting in some of the action scenes, so we can't quite tell what we're looking at. That's sort of in keeping with Lovecraft's approach. People always speak about how Lovecraft was always trying to get around describing the phenomenon in specific detail. He would use sort of descriptive terms like ghastly, horrible, or things like that. But you never really knew exactly what he was talking about. And it reminded me of this quote that I'll read from Lovecraft. This was in the book that he wrote about supernatural horror and literature. He wrote a little book about his philosophy of how to write cosmic horror stories. And he says, the basis of all true cosmic horror is the violation of the order of nature. What you see in Alien, it's not a violation of the cosmic order of nature. It's a violation of our understanding of nature. Right? We're encountering something that's completely different from our experience. But he says, the basis of all true cosmic horror is the violation of the order of nature, and the profoundest violations are always the least concrete and describable. So what he's saying there sort of leads into what Ridley Scott's approach was, that the most horrifying things are the things that are almost impossible to describe in concrete terms. And for a filmmaker, probably best to avoid describing in concrete terms, avoiding giving us all the details about what the space jockey is and what exactly they were up to with all those eggs in his ship, and the whole history of his species and all that sort of stuff. We don't know, right?
Yeah, you save that to your later movie you make
well
20 years later.
Unfortunately, that's what's happened.
Yeah.
But I think that we are afraid of things that we don't understand.
Yeah.
Right? The unknown is, and this is another thing that Lovecraft was always on about, the unknown is the thing that we fear the most. And as soon as you begin to add all sorts of detail, as soon as you begin to give us the backstory on everything, then we become familiar with it, and it's no longer has the power to scare us. When I first saw Alien in 1979, I saw it at the New York Twin Theater. I think it was up on 62nd Street. It's still there, the theater, which is unusual. Most of the theaters from my youth are long gone. But I saw it in a packed house, and nobody in the theater had any idea what to expect. And when I sat down in the theater, you know me, I'm always buying the program.
You got your program.
I got the program, and right away I was really encouraged by looking at the photos because, again, I didn't know anything about what to expect about the film. I knew it was something about space travel. But as soon as I start looking at these photos, and you see things like the photo of the space jockey, somebody who's coming into this movie, they don't know what it's about. They see this, they're thinking, this is going to be something, right?
Yeah.
We had never seen anything like that in a movie before. And we had never seen anything like the designs that H.R. Giger came up with before. So it was an extraordinarily effective movie for the crowd that I saw it with. The audience was just absolutely, on the edge of their seat. And I think it was largely due to the fact that we had no idea what to expect. The fear of the unknown.
Right.
We went in not knowing what the plot was beyond just a basic premise, and we had no idea what we were going to be subjected to. And the movie can be really seen now as a suspense movie with like 3 major shock scenes. The first big shock, I guess, of course, would be the classic scene of John Hurt, giving birth, as he says, his birthing scene. The Chestburster scene is really just everybody was stunned by that.
Yeah.
And the second big shock, I guess, is when Ian Holmes' character, the robot, and he's actually described as a robot in the movie, he tries to kill Sigourney Weaver, and then he gets his head knocked off.
Yeah.
And I have to admit, when I was watching that the first time, I thought, this movie's going off the rails. What the fuck is going on?
Yeah.
First, he's got like what looks like milk dripping down his face. And my mind is thinking, is that just supposed to be sweat? And they sort of put a little color in it to make it stand out in the photography. But then he's got, it's like streaming off. And then he's trying to kill her by stuffing a rolled up porno magazine down her throat. And when Yaphet Kotto finally comes in and gives him a bash and his head goes flying off, I said, I don't know what the fuck this is. I mean, it was amazing and it was startling, but for a moment there, I thought they had just lost control of their senses. I thought the filmmaker had just gone crazy. And that's, and the final shock scene, I guess, is when the alien ends up in the shuttlecraft. We think the movie's over.
Yeah.
And of course, the more savvy people in the audience are thinking, well, if it was over, then it would be over.
Right? Yeah.
So there's a reason why the movie is still going on, and it's probably because the alien is going to make another appearance. But the way he makes the appearance, after she's taken off her clothes and she's basically completely vulnerable, right? She's down to her panties, and suddenly that arm shoots out.
Comes out, yeah.
And you've been trained by the movie up to that point to be very concerned about little gray, shiny objects. And you're thinking when she reaches into some of the stuff and you see that big bulbous head in the foreground, you're thinking, geez, could that be the alien? Oh. And of course, it turns out the alien is there.
I was going to say, watching it again today, Tom Skerritt climbing through the corridor.
Oh, yeah.
And the first time you see the alien with his hands come out. Today, that was still... That whole scene's still tense and causes complete anxiety when I was watching it. I was wondering if maybe that's where they got the idea for the scenes in Die Hard of climbing through the...
Possibly.
That's what it was reminding me of.
It could be a whole bunch of other films and other genres that are taking something from the way Alien was done. But I agree with you. That scene was enormously suspenseful. Anybody that has any sort of feeling of claustrophobia just the idea of him going into those tunnels, those air vents or whatever they were supposed to be.
And I don't think it would have been as effective if he was laying down crawling. I think the fact that he's like crunched up in that, that's what made it.
Those little apertures that close behind him.
Oh yeah.
Those were disturbing in themselves because there's a certain finality to it when those close. First of all, you're thinking, if you're a worrywart like me, you're thinking, is somebody going to get caught in one of those? But it has that, the sound effects too are very impressive. Sound effects all through the movie are very impressive. In terms of sound, it's probably one of the most disturbing movies that's ever been made.
Yeah.
But the Harry Dean Stanton scene is sort of the opposite of the Tom Skerritt death scene, because in Harry Dean Stanton's case, he's out in this very large room, this enormous, almost cathedral-like space. But still, the suspense is tremendous because Scott puts the camera right in his face for long periods of time. And when you see that, you think, well, what's going on, behind him, or what's going on off to the side? We can't see, and it drives you nuts when you're watching it. You keep waiting for something to happen. It's very suspenseful. But I suppose for a modern audience, since they know all the surprises, it probably doesn't work quite as well. It's not as effective. But it's still, I think, we were talking about whether or not we should focus on just this movie or talk about the whole series.
Yeah.
Personally, I think everything after the second film is not worth discussing. John Hurt said that he felt that all the other movies in the series were basically action-adventure movies, but that this movie was unusual because it was realistic. It was reasonable. The things that the people do sort of make sense in the context of the story. There's no absurd leaps. Frankly, when you get to the point like with Alien 4, where you're talking about Sigourney Weaver's character being a clone of the original person, and she has like superpowers or alien type powers, it's like, we're in comic book land now. And that's so far away from what the original film was. The original film was, we're going to try to make this as convincing as possible. You're actually going to feel like you're in a spaceship. And the alien creature is really going to be alien. It's not just going to be some Shakespearean actor with a piece of rubber on his head, or something like that. It's going to be something you'd never seen before. And so
I was going to say, now watching some of the behind the scenes and documentary stuff, Veronica Cartwright had mentioned that this was kind of a Hitchcock movie.
Right.
I couldn't figure out what she was referring to or what she meant by that.
Well, maybe she was, having been in The Birds, the little girl, maybe she just naturally was thinking in those terms. I suppose I can see what she is saying. If nothing else, Hitchcock was the great master of building suspense. And a lot of the techniques that Scott uses in this film probably are taken from the approach that Hitchcock took. The big difference that I see is that Hitchcock never used like a documentary style approach.
Yeah.
Whereas Ridley Scott in this film uses that constantly. The scenes, for instance, when they're landing the spaceship and something goes wrong and there's a lot of confusion and smoke and fire and things, a lot of crosstalk on the intercoms. That almost has like a documentary feel. That feels like if a camera was on a ship at sea during a war, during a sea battle, that would be the sort of effect you get. The lighting and everything about it is meant to create a complete feeling of realism. And it's not that the technology was necessarily accurate. There's no way for us to know what spaceships are going to look like hundreds of years from now.
Yeah.
But it was accurate in the sense that it felt right. The stuff that they were using, like cathode ray tube TVs and things like that, obviously that's not accurate to the time, the future that the film is set in, but it feels right. It feels real. It's probably one of the most convincing depictions of space travel that I've seen in films, despite the fact that the actual miniature stuff that they do outside the ship is not really state of the art, even for that time.
Yeah.
You know, they didn't use motion control cameras. And if you watch, like I watched the DVD version that they put out. They put out the 4 films on DVD. I guess it must be 10 years ago or 15 years ago. And the advantage to that is that it's the original theatrical version of the first film, which is what I wanted to watch.
Yeah, that's the one I watched.
Yeah, that's the best version, I think. But when you watch that, you can see that some of the spaceship shots, there are certain imperfections in them. You know, they're not completely seamless. And it doesn't matter. I mean, it doesn't matter at all, because what's going on inside the ship is so convincing that, you know, you don't even care. By that time, I mean, this film came out 2 years after Star Wars. And by that time, we had seen so many movies that had spaceships flying in space, you know, that we would pretty much pass the point where it's going to impress us no matter how well it's done. So the fact that it didn't look like they fussed over that too much, they just got functional stuff, that was fine, you know, and it allowed us to shift our attention to the more important things that were going on inside, you know. But that year, 1979, there were a lot of movies that had special effects and a lot of movies that had science fiction themes and horror themes. Matter of fact, Newsweek had what I guess has become kind of a famous cover. Hollywood Scary Summer was the headline, with a picture of Sigourney Weaver's face. And it covered all the horror movies that were coming out that year, including Prophecy, which turned out to be a stinker, the Amityville Horror, which I guess it's up to you to decide.
Yeah.
That's a stinker, not a favorite of mine. The Black Hole, of course, was Disney's very elaborate science fiction movie, not very good. Moonraker was James Bond's venture into outer space.
Space, right.
Nightwing was a movie about a plague of bats, I think, that was put out by one of the major studios. That turned out to be a bomb. The Frank Langella version of Dracula came out in 1979. And of course, Star Trek: The Motion Picture. Star Trek: The Motion Picture, it's interesting that came out the same year as Alien. To me, it's even more interesting than the fact that The Black Hole came out.
Yeah.
Black Hole, we could pretty much dismiss. But Star Trek: The Motion Picture was, at the time, one of the most expensive movies ever made. And the stiffness and the fakeness, and I love Star Trek. I watch it no matter what. But let's be honest, that movie was pretty stiff and boring and uninspiring. To have that come out the same year as Alien, and to have Alien be so cheap in comparison. I mean, the budget on Alien was much lower than Star Trek: The Motion Picture. So you had all those people working, all those very talented people working on Star Trek: The Motion Picture, and they ended up with this big, shiny, I won't say a turd, but sort of an inert object that didn't really impress anybody. And Alien, on the other hand, just because they decided to go outside the normal folks that would be working in Hollywood and going with people like Giger and some of the other artists that contributed to the design of the suits and the designs of the ships and all that, and the interiors of the ships. People that came from heavy metal, the French
magazine,
like Mobius, and I guess there's a bunch of others. I won't list them all, but you know the guys. A whole bunch of people that really created made a tremendous contribution, because beyond just coming up with the final designs, they came up with all sorts of stuff that sort of got the filmmakers' imaginations going, right? All sorts of elaborate things that you could say, this must have been very exciting and inspiring for the folks that were making the movie, to have this enormous amount of creativity coming in from all quarters, all sorts of different designs of the interiors of the ship, stuff that may or may not have been used. I think some of these actually might be Ridley Scott's.
Yeah.
It just makes a big difference, because suddenly you're seeing exactly what an audience wants to see, which is something we haven't seen before. You know, that's the promise that a movie like this makes. And Alien, for once, really did that.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those, everything came together. If one person that was involved in this movie was not on it, you wouldn't have had, like, if they wouldn't have gotten H.R. Giger to do the designs, wouldn't have worked. Whatever they would have gotten other than that wouldn't have worked.
Right. And you just have to look at some of the designs that they were thinking of,
Before,
Dan
before
O'Bannon, and you say, yeah, that would have been great for a Corman movie. And actually, Corman was interested in the film.
doing it, yeah.
They took it to Corman first, and he was willing to do it, but it would have been a tiny little horror movie, and it would have been something that would have been completely different in its effect, if not its plot, than this. But that process, you watched that documentary. It's like a 3-hour documentary.
Yeah, I watched one called Memory, and then there was another one.
Right, Memories is the most recent one, but The Beast Within,
yeah,
which is a terrific documentary. I forgot the name of the guy who directed it. He's actually somebody that works with Ridley Scott. I guess he's in charge of doing all the special editions, the DVDs and things, and supplementary stuff for Scott movies. But that really is probably the most comprehensive documentary I've seen about the making of a film. They talked to all the important people. The only people that I didn't see in that were, I guess Yaphet Kotto didn't show up, Ian Holm didn't show up in it, but just about everybody else says their piece. And Dan O'Bannon, particularly, the film sort of starts, just like Memories, the other documentary they mentioned, it starts with him because he's the guy that came up with the original idea. Him working with Ron Shusett, I guess is the pronunciation of his name. He came up with this idea, which was, I guess, a continuation of his thinking of what he wanted to do from Dark Star.
Dark Star, yeah.
Dark Star was the little student film, I guess, that he did with John Carpenter. It received theatrical release. It had a lot of interesting things in it, but it was unsatisfying to him because it was a comedy and the monster in it was a beach ball.
Yeah.
So I remember seeing Dark Star in a revival house after Alien, because after the success of Alien, and I guess Halloween eventually popped up. It was Halloween 80 or 81, somewhere in there, when the first Halloween movie came out.
Yeah.
So Dark Star was sort of put out in some revival houses or midnight screenings, where it's the guy who did Alien and the guy who did Halloween.
Yeah.
And everybody thought, oh, great. And of course, it's not really that impressive.
Yeah,
film.
I tracked it down after I watched, because Return of the Living Dead is one of my favorite.
I know you mentioned
like that, movies, and of course that was Dan O'Bannon, and I was watching it with commentary, and he was talking about his first movie, Dark Star, and how I guess George Lucas was just impressed. Like, how did you do that movie? You know, it's just a beach ball and all this. I was like, well, I've got to see this. So I tracked it down and watched it.
Well, I mean, for what it was impressive. It's just that I guess there was a part of us that was thinking, this is going to be something really astonishing.
Yeah.
And, it was, he uses a lot of techniques that I guess Kubrick used in 2001, the cutouts on glass, I guess, for the spaceships and things like that. And, for its time, it was impressive. But you can sort of see the ideas there. I mean, just beyond the fact that it's like average Joes working as astronauts, like truckers in space. I guess in Dark Star, they're technically scientists. I don't recall exactly what their job is, but they're regular folks living in a sort of regular lived-in environment in space, and they end up being chased around by an alien. So his desire was to take that germ of an idea and to do it in a convincing way, to make it do a serious film where the alien would really be convincing. And I guess he was one of because he was working on Jodorowsky's Dune, the ill-fated production of Dune. And for some reason, I guess Jodorowsky saw Dark Star and he said, I want you to work on my film. And he actually, I don't know where in Europe they were shooting it or where they were planning it, but he traveled to Europe and spent some time there working on designs and things like that. And eventually that project fell through. But that put him in a good position because he had met all the other guys that were working on Dune, including Giger, I assume, and Mobius. So those were people that he could go back home when he started to pitch Alien, which I guess he originally called Star Beast.
Star Beast, yeah. He
could say, these are the people that could bring this to life. These are the people that could make this, an impressive film. And they originally got the script, found its way into the hands of Walter Hill And Walter Hill, I like some Walter Hill movies. He's a talented guy. And I guess you could say that he is responsible for a style of screenwriting that is unique and has been very influential. But he doesn't sound like a terribly nice guy,
Yeah.
to be honest. Anyway, they had a production company called Brandywine, which was him and Gordon Carroll and David Giler, I think his name was. There are some unpleasant things that are said about those two guys by Dan O'Bannon and also by other people that have worked with them on the subsequent Alien sequels. But we'll leave them out of the picture because they're not really important. The important thing is that after doing one treatment, one draft, Walter Hill did a draft of Dan O'Bannon's script. There's a lot of debate as to how much he changed, how much is attributable to him and how much is attributable to Dan O'Bannon. It appears that Dan O'Bannon was able to sort of create a connection with Ridley Scott when he finally came in. He had done one other film at that point, which I saw when it first came out because everybody was talking about how it was similar to Barry Lyndon and he was maybe possibly the next Kubrick. And I guess just based on that reputation, they reached out to him. Most of the other big directors weren't interested or weren't available. So they reached out to him. He came on board, and him and Dan O'Bannon, I guess, made a connection, possibly because he recognized that Dan O'Bannon was a real science fiction nut. And Ridley Scott wasn't. He didn't really particularly like it. So Dan O'Bannon was the one who actually presented H.R. Giger's stuff to Scott. And Scott says when he saw that, he said, well, that
was it, yeah.
Our search is over. We know exactly what the alien is supposed to look like. Because that was the real question mark, was how would you do something that would really be scary? I mean, they wanted to do it as an A film, and they sold it to 20th Century Fox on the basis of the idea that this wasn't going to be a B movie. It would be B movie material, but it would be treated like an A film. And that's reflected not just in how the story was, how the script was reworked, but also in terms of the elaborate sets, the attention to detail, and also the really high quality cast that they hired. I mean, what a terrific cast.
Oh, yeah.
Incidentally, John Finch, who was the guy who starred in Hitchcock's Frenzy, he was originally going to play the role that eventually was played by John Hurt. He actually worked one day on the film, and he became so ill that they actually, according to Ridley Scott, they had to actually carry him off the set. And John Hurt, who had been offered the role originally, wasn't available. He was called in as a sort of last-minute replacement. I think he was like, they asked him if he wanted it, and he was there the next day working.
Yeah.
So him and Yaphet Kotto, who was a tremendous actor, a really dynamic presence in this movie and in just about every movie he did.
Oh, yeah.
Veronica Cartwright, who had a long, history and is a very, unusual screen presence. John Hurt, Ian Holm, who I don't think had done any major films. He certainly hadn't done any science fiction films prior to this. One of the best British actors of his time, right? I mean, just between him and John Hurt, that's terrific. That's all you need right there. Tom Skerritt, was in Altman's MASH, and
he was perfect in this role. Just sold it.
Everybody was. There was this sort of casual feeling that really added to that documentary effect, that you were just sort of catching people just as they were, that the camera just happened to be there. The conversations have that sort of loose, spontaneous feel that makes it completely believable.
Yeah, and a small crew. You don't have all these other extra. I mean, you mentioned that in talking about Star Trek, it was better later on when they just had the smaller crew. You know what I'm saying? We just have these 8 people.
Well,
that we have to deal with.
I think that it's true of Star Wars as well. That when you have people that seem like contemporary to our time, regular folks, right? farm boy and a hot rodder, they seem like people we can relate to, and they behave on screen like regular folks. In this, these are people that look like real people, And so in a horror movie where we're going to be asked to care about what happens to these people, that's essential, right? I mean, what could be more important than believing that these people are real people that actually are existing in space? The fact that he referenced the old Dark House movies, but he approached this in a style or with the same sort of approach that they were using more frequently in what we call the new Hollywood movies.
Yeah.
Shooting in real places. Well, you couldn't shoot in a real place with this movie, right? They weren't going to go into outer space, and they weren't going to be able to find a spaceship. But they built the sets so that they were completely contained, apparently. So once you went into the set, you had to walk through the whole ship
to come out.
To get out. So that created this sort of claustrophobic feeling with the actors. They really felt like they were in a spaceship because there was nothing else. There was no other point of reference, right? It wasn't as if they were looking at an open wall with all the crew and a bunch of people smoking cigarettes and drinking coffee. So doing that, and also using practical lights, this is something that Kubrick was doing towards the end with Eyes Wide Shut. All or most of the lighting was practical lights. Whatever lights were being used on the set, in other words, all the lights that were part of the set,
panels, yeah,
that was what was illuminating the actors. So right away, you're creating a feeling of realism that you're never going to get if you're shooting it with a bunch of lights that have everything perfectly lit and the old-fashioned Hollywood style of doing things. That made a big difference, I think. And when you watch those opening scenes where we're sort of going through the ship before they wake up, you really feel like you're in a real place.
Yeah.
It's got to be one of the most impressive sets anybody ever made, right? I mean, it really is extraordinary. And that you could spend so much time going through it and build suspense just by sort of creeping through this environment is a real testament to his skill as a director, right? Before we've even seen a human face, we're already beginning to feel a little nervous. There's a little vent or something on one of the panels or near one of the control panels, and as we're going through that shot, that long shot as they go through the ship before the crew wakes up, there's a little burst of air that causes some of the papers to flutter.
Yeah.
And there are little things that are sort of bobbing and jumping before the computer comes on. And those things were kind of like, what's happening? The audience reacted to that. Building that feeling of, you don't know what's going to happen. Anything could jump out at any time from any corner, from any, the shadows. That really begins to create this sort of feeling of suspense that is almost unbearable in some scenes.
Yeah. Do you think they had Jonesy on here just so they could do a cat jump scare? Is that the only reason they have a cat in space?
No, Sigourney Weaver said in that documentary that she thought she was allergic to the cat.
To the cat, yeah.
They had like 4 cats. And she was worried because she was afraid that they would probably find it easier to replace her than
a cat. Yeah.
It is kind of a funny idea that while all the humans are running around out of their minds trying to find an escape or a solution to this problem, the cat is just sort of lounging in the
around,
corner. Yeah. And it's one of 2 crew members that survives. Right?
I think the first time I watched, I kept thinking at the end that cat's it's gonna burst out of that cat.
I think that's
what the ending was gonna be, but then it didn't happen.
And I think that shot where you see the alien sort of peering down at the carrying case with the cat in it, that was meant to give the audience the idea that there was going to be something in the cat. So that is another way where he sort of distracted us from what really was going to happen.
Yeah.
But that feeling of realism and the building of suspense, I think, is probably what made the film so memorable and so impactful when I first saw it. When you watch some of the gore scenes or shock scenes now, they aren't quite as gory and quite as shocking as I originally remember them, which sort of makes me think that it's the skill in the filmmaking and in the editing that made them so effective in the first place.
Yeah, I think before I watched it today, I think the last time I'd seen it was whenever those DVDs came out that you mentioned. So it's been that long since I'd seen it before. And there's just stuff, there's stuff you forget about, and then of course I kept thinking it's bloodier than what it was, and well, I mean, obviously the chestburster scene is pretty bloody, but the rest of the movie's not. I mean, all the other death scenes, you really don't see anything.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting how that happens, where a movie gets a reputation for being so horrifying and so disgusting that people are actually passing out or puking,
Yeah,
and then you go and you watch it after some years and you realize it doesn't really have that. It's true at Texas Chainsaw Massacre as well. It doesn't really have that much in it.
yeah.
It's the
For some reason, I remembered the Lambert character being picked up by the tail. You know what I'm saying? Because it just, I don't know, it just shows it coming up behind, from behind her, and that's it. Cuts away to a scream. You don't see anything at all.
Well, she makes this sort of strange noise that we hear over that, and I think the idea was supposed to be that spear at the end of the tail is supposed to penetrate a person's back and lift them up or hold them in place while the alien.
I was thinking I saw that happen the first, you know what I'm saying, but I didn't.
Well, yeah, I mean, I forget what movie we were talking about recently where I guess it was Phantasm, where we kept recalling. Right, we said, I thought that there was a scene where no, it was suggested it would look like the movie was heading in that direction.
But no, I'm sure they've done it 100 times in the sequels, and that's what I'm thinking of. But
well, maybe so. Yeah. See, I'm fortunate in that I didn't bother. I think I watched the third. I tried to watch it some night when I was really drunk, so I don't really remember it all. But the fourth I passed on, even though I have it, I wouldn't be bothered to watch it. And all the things like the Alien Predator movies, I just don't see any point in that,
Yeah.
It's I can understand why the sort of fanboy crowd wants that. I know that there are some people that will say about the first movie, I like the fact that you didn't see stuff.
Yeah.
But there's going to be an equal number of people that say, oh, I wish we had seen
more, yeah.
I wish we know more about the space jockey and what his past was and how did he come to be there and what was he doing with those eggs.
Well, when you get to Prometheus, you realize, okay, I don't really care.
Well, that's the problem, right?
It's not as elaborate, as exciting, or that you just like, that was kind of boring.
The problem is, and this is true of a lot of the streaming series that keep these ideas sort of floating out there for seasons, is that when you finally get to the answer, you realize it probably would have been better if we didn't know. Right? Because there's no way they can come up with an answer or a history, a backstory that is going to be satisfying. The reason why we're intrigued in the first place is because we don't know those things.
We don't know, yeah.
Right? There are some, I guess you could say, lapses in the plot. Like, for instance, just from the standpoint of logic, I would say that if you're on a ship with a creature like that, you probably should just get to the shuttle, seal it, and take off.
Yeah.
You don't bother setting the auto-destruct mechanism. Now, I can understand why the people in this ship may have had such feelings of hatred and resentment for the corporation or the company that did this to them, that intentionally put them in harm's way, that they may say, well, we have to make sure we destroy the ship so they won't get the alien, right? They won't get the thing that they wanted. So that's possibly a motivation. It seems to me that if you're in that sort of situation of complete stark terror, and you just want to get away from the thing that's killing everybody,
you're not going to care about revenge or getting back at the man.
Just get to the shuttle. And I suppose if they had done that right away, while 3 of them were still alive, they could just stay in the shuttle, keep the door closed. There's only one door. This sounds similar to the discussion we had about Night of the Living Dead. And they know that the creature has to stay out. I can't get in. If they want to, they could take turns sleeping. If they want to go to, one can go to sleep for a couple of months and then wake up, and the other one can go to sleep for a couple of months. And so there's always somebody on duty in case the creature does find a way to get in. They can respond. They won't be caught napping. But if they're in that situation, then the big Nostromo ship is presumably on a course towards Earth or towards someplace where they're going to be able to be picked up. The shuttle will be taken along with it. Presumably, Nostromo probably is got more resources than the little shuttle.
Yeah.
So if you ever did find yourself in a situation where you need to make a course correction, or you need to get more food or more coolant or whatever they need, you can make a journey into the ship briefly and get those things, right? You haven't taken yourself away from the ship and blown it up along with all the resources that you might need.
Yeah.
So that would be my strategy. But it's also true that when people are in a situation like that where they're panicking, they're probably not thinking clearly, right? They can't strategize.
No sort of faster than light travel in this one, right?
Yeah, well, that's another interesting
Or they just
question.
never mention it. I guess they're just using the cryogenic sleep to do long travel.
I guess so, but I don't know if that would really work. I mean, it's hard to imagine that even with cryogenic sleep, that you would be able to, it would be beyond the lifetime of a human being.
Yeah.
Even in that sort of cryogenic freeze, to get to a solar system that has alien life forms like these creatures, like the
Yeah, by the time
space
they get back to Earth, everybody that hired them for that job is dead.
Right. Well, of course, in the sequel, they play with that idea a little bit with Sigourney Weaver learning that her daughter has grown up and died, I guess.
Yeah.
But the question is, would anybody who's doing that sort of work, would any of them leave loved ones behind? I mean, if you had a loved one, you wouldn't go off on a space mission where you could easily be detoured, and you might spend years out in space, right? So I don't know. I think that's one of those things, just like with Star Trek, where they sort of are ignoring the realities of, I guess that's what, relativity. That time passes differently for objects that are moving
people
away.
in space. Yeah.
So, but I guess we can't be too particular about those things. There probably are other lapses in logic, but it seems to me mostly it's pretty reasonable and it's pretty practical in the way it sort of proceeds. One thing follows the other. There are no ridiculous lapses in logic or continuity. It works pretty well, I would say, as a story.
Yeah, I think the Facehugger sells it for me. I think it's because it looked so real, because it was. I mean, they obviously use shellfish and oysters for it, but that's what sold it right there, that Facehugger.
Yeah. To be able to do
nasty.
Yeah, it really did. Those close-ups were unusual too. Usually with makeup stuff like that, or any sort of props, special effects props, they would sort of keep the camera back a little bit so you don't see it in detail. But they put so much time and effort into those props that they could get right up close and give you a very close view of them. But that documentary approach also can be seen. It's almost like a Kubrickian approach in like those scenes where Ian Holm is at his station and he's looking at the specimen, and the camera is sort of behind him, and we're expecting some sort of shock scene.
Yeah.
And it turns out to be Sigourney Weaver stepping up behind him, and the camera stays on Ian Holm. And we hear Sigourney Weaver talking to him, and it's only when they get to a certain point in the scene when the camera turns or cuts to her.
For her, yeah.
That approach to shooting a scene is unusual. Normally, they would have the usual shot, reverse shot, and dialogue, and they probably wouldn't have the length of the scenes. The scenes are quite long, I don't think the term leisurely would be right, because there doesn't seem to be anything leisurely about a suspense film of this sort.
Yeah.
But it seems to be intentionally slow, so that we're constantly questioning what's going to happen next.
Yeah, but there's scenes whenever they're at like I guess I'll call it the dinner table, and it's just one shot, everybody's in frame.
Right.
But then like that one scene, I can't remember, I guess where it's right after one of them had died, and Yaphet Kotto was gonna leave. Well, the camera doesn't follow him. He walks, into the background, is out of focus, and is still part of the scene, talking, having dialogue, and the camera just stays there.
Right. some of those scenes do seem, according to that documentary at least, there's a certain amount of improvisation there. They show us some alternate takes.
Yeah.
Where Yaphet Kotto was saying slightly different things. And it seems
or
like
the scene where Tom Skerritt gets up and goes into the background
right, yeah,
to get with Veronica Cartwright, and they're just now they're back there having their own conversation,
right,
separate from what we were just watching.
right. Yeah, the interpretation of that filmmaker that did the Memories documentary was that was Tom Skerritt leaving the working class guys and going
Yeah.
with sort of moving between the two classes. I guess that's kind of hard to avoid the fact that there is a class distinction here, right? You got the below deck people and the above deck
Yeah.
people. What I liked about it is, and this is one of the reasons why I didn't care for the edited, the special edition that they did where they put certain material back in. What I liked about it is, even though there's a distinction between the classes, and you can tell that, you know, Yaphet Kotto and Harry Dean Stanton's characters don't particularly like these other people,
Right.
they still get along.
Yeah.
There is an open hostility because anybody in that situation, you know, they would realize you're on the ship with these people, you have to go get along.
Yeah.
If people insult you, you nod and smile, right? Or you get in on the joke. But what they had that one scene where after John Hurt has been put into the medical observation room, and Dallas and Ian Holmes' character are working on him. The other characters are outside and they're observing through a window. And Sigourney Weaver comes in, and Veronica Cartwright launches herself, "You bitch," and smacks her.
Yeah.
And apparently they did that a couple of times to try to get it right. And then they eventually cut it out of the theatrical version. And when Ridley Scott did his restored version or special edition, he put that scene back in, and I don't think it works because that brings us close to almost like soap opera melodramatics.
Yeah.
You know, "You bitch," smacking people around, you know. These people in this situation, they would hold all those resentments inside of them. That would be part of the stress of a space journey, is not being able to launch yourself at the other people and hit them when you get angry at them. Now, people might say, well, Veronica Cartwright's character is being established as kind of an emotional person because she's crying a lot in the film. But she's also a controlled person. You can see that a lot of times when she hears bad news, like you're going out on the search party, you know, sound great, you know, and she sort of swallows it. She doesn't like it, but she doesn't jump up and start, you know, screaming at people. They're all pressurized as much as the ship is, right? They're all holding in their emotions and feelings. And we can all appreciate this because we have to do it every time we go to work.
Yep.
Every work environment has a certain amount of that. So it's immediately recognizable, especially to working class people, right? You can immediately say, yes, I can see, or this resembles reality.
Yeah.
And it also adds that additional layer of stress and tension to it because we don't know how much we can trust anybody, right? We don't really know. I mean, obviously they're laying the groundwork for the revelation that Ian Holmes' character is completely untrustworthy. And that doesn't come as a complete surprise, or I shouldn't say that, it doesn't come as an implausible surprise because we never really feel like we know everybody that well. We never really know if we can trust people. I mean, Dallas, Tom Skerritt's character, he actually says that. I don't trust
anybody, yeah.
And she's asking him, can we trust Ian Holmes' character, right? What's his name? Ash? Is it?
Yeah, Ash.
And the few times when the movie sort of floats closer to that sort of old-fashioned type, histrionical, melodramatic type stuff, that's probably when it starts to sound a little fake as far as the dialogue is concerned.
Right.
It's better if it's colder, you know. That's the thing that we should learn from Stanley Kubrick. That The Shining, it's not my favorite Kubrick film, but it works because we're distanced from it. We're just observing. We don't feel like he's pulling the strings, like sort of a Spielbergian approach,
right?
Trying to make us laugh one moment and cry the next, and fear the next. It's distanced so that you don't know what to expect. And that's a far more upsetting and unsettling feeling.
Yeah, when you go back and watch it, like rewatch it, I kind of noticed it today. Whenever right before the chestburster scene, the in-home character, he knows what's coming.
Yes.
Every time they show him, he knows that there's something inside this guy and it's going to come out.
Right.
Every time they show him, he just has that look of like, okay, I'm getting ready for it. He's anticipating it. He's waiting for it. Mm-hmm. But without saying anything. That's the way they shot it.
And he almost
look at him, and you're just like, okay, this guy knows.
He almost has in some of the shots almost like a little smile on his face.
Yeah, like he's excited for
it. When he sneaks up on Sigourney Weaver as she's finally learning from Mother what's going on,
what the plan is, yeah.
And he says, with a little bit of a smile, he says, "There's an explanation for all this, or I can explain all of this."
Yeah.
Very satisfying for the audience when she just belts him,
Yeah.
Because that's what everybody. Unfortunately, that sort of set him off, and a little bit of the HAL 9000 effect there.
Right.
He apparently has some mental illness issues for a robot, more than you would expect.
And we talk about the lack of gore. The inside of that android is the nastiest thing I've ever seen. The white milk, and I don't know what those little
look like pearl onions.
Yeah. Fiber optic cable in there.
Well, I really appreciated it the first time I saw it, because it would have been so easy for them to just do what every other movie would do and just have a bunch of circuit boards or whatever.
Circuit boards and wires
and things like that coming out. So I really appreciate the fact that they said, no, this is completely different technology, and it has to look different. I'm not, Ridley Scott talked about the problem they have with the rubber head. And I think that probably is the weakest special effect in the film.
Yeah.
But it doesn't damage the effectiveness of the scene.
I think they hold on it too long before they cut to his actual head. Whenever they do the cut, I think if they just wouldn't have had almost a minute of her trying to get the head to sit upright, and then it finally cuts, and you're like, okay, now that was obviously a rubber head.
Yeah, and also. You can tell from the weight of it that there's no way you could actually get that head to sit up.
Yeah,
the flimsy little rubber stuff that it looks like a mask.
Yeah,
it looks like that is all just the flash part that would be normally cut off if you were making a rubber mask. But the speech that he gives is so effective.
Yeah, you just don't care.
You don't mind, because that makes the scene work.
Its structural perfection is matched only by its hostility.
You admire
it. I admire its purity.
One of the documentaries was talking about how, I guess, studio execs were on set trying to rush him through it. Why are you not doing this? Why are you not so?
Yeah, it surprised me to hear that.
It's
hard to imagine anybody looking at those rushes and saying, "We got to hurry these guys up." But there might be some people, and this might be true of the two supposed producers, that Walter Hill's production company was formed from, Giler and Carroll, I guess, Gordon Carroll and David Giler. I mean, they're fellows that really haven't done anything. I think one of them is dead now. I don't think either one of them are going to be remembered as geniuses of cinema, and yet they found themselves in a position where they could make believe they knew better than Ridley Scott. In addition to the scene of Veronica Cartwright slapping Sigourney Weaver, another scene that was added into the special edition was that scene of Sigourney Weaver finding Dallas's body in a cocoon towards the end of the movie.
Yeah.
And it's funny because
for some reason I kept waiting for that in this movie. I was like, "Where's that scene?" So I guess I'm remembering from the.
You must have seen.
Cut. Yeah,
you must have seen the director's cut. Yeah, I saw the director's cut in the theater when they reissued it, and there were a lot of little things like that bothered me, because my feeling is that when you have a movie that's pretty close to being perfect, you can make some changes that might improve it. There are little obvious things that you can fix with the special effects and whatnot, but to actually add in stuff and risk damaging the very delicate balance that you achieved, that doesn't seem like a good idea, particularly at that late stage of the movie.
Oh yeah.
Tom Skerritt said in that documentary that he thought it was unwise because you're racing for curtain. You're trying to get the movie over with, right? This is the moment of supreme suspense. This is you're going to be able to escape the ship, and they're going to stop and have a chat.
Yeah.
So that was unwise, and it doesn't work too because it's not really very convincingly done. The makeup and the set don't really seem to have had as much time put into them as the other parts of the film, and it also points to a problem with the basic premise, which is we don't really understand how this whole process works. Is it possible that the alien is actually developed? First of all, we'll overlook the fact that the alien goes from being like this big to being taller than a man.
Yeah.
In what I assume is the space of a day or two, right? We don't have a clear idea how much time has passed.
How much time, yeah.
But it's very quickly. He goes, Harry Dean Stanton picks up the little shed skin, and that's still the little creature. And apparently the next step is 7-foot tall monster.
Yeah.
So we'll overlook that. Okay, that's the way this alien works. That's this. But is it possible that he could grow to that size and also have developed that wall, or that whatever that secretions are that makes those little blobs that Dallas has been stuck to?
Stuck to, yeah.
And I guess he would also have to create an egg, right? Where did the egg come from for the face hugger that
Hugger to come out, yeah.
I mean, are we saying that the xenomorph has the ability to put I thought the whole process was that the egg has to have the facehugger come out.
Facehugger, yeah.
Facehugger does. So where is the facehugger in this? The only facehugger in this is the one that hits John Hurt.
John Hurt, yeah.
How has Dallas been infected or impregnated? So yeah, it causes us to think too much about parts of the film.
Yeah.
Best not think about. It should that you shouldn't dwell on that. So I'm glad that the theatrical version is the version is a version that is still available, and you can see the theatrical version, and you don't have to have those missteps added back in. This is a real plague nowadays.
With people adding stuff, yeah.
Yeah, you never can feel like you've seen a movie because a few years go by and they say, oh, he's a new version. And I think that that's important. People should be wise enough, and I think Ridley Scott is. I hope he is. Should be wise enough to say whatever I might have thought or felt. The movie came out and it was an enormous success, and everybody loved it. So leave it the fuck alone.
Stop adding to it. Yeah.
plenty of movies that he did where he trusted his judgment and they didn't turn out so well.
Yeah.
So in this case, it did turn out well. Trust the voice of the people. The people are saying you did it right. Leave it alone. Right? Don't monkey around with it.
Yeah. No, I did see, like, just doing research on it. I did see an article, and the title was something like "From Science Fiction to Theater: How Ridley Scott Saved Alien."
Oh yeah, I saw that.
And I kept thinking, I don't know. I think Dan O'Bannon pretty much had a solid film, like, there, just waiting to be shot. I don't understand.
Yeah. Well,
I don't understand why no one really gives Dan O'Bannon enough credit for for Alien.
Well,
than just, I think, does it even say written by it, or is it based on?
Oh, I'm not sure.
Credits,
I think he finally.
They give him final writing credits on it.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, they may all get credit to some extent.
Yeah.
I forget the exact. I guess we can add that into this
Yeah.
video when we get a chance to check it afterwards. But I as much as I respect Dan O'Bannon, I do think it's possible that if things had played out differently, he could have ended up with another film that would have been maybe marginally better than Dark Star.
Right.
So it really was of course, we do give him credit for having the smarts to say eager.
Yeah.
That's something that he suggested to Ridley Scott. But Ridley Scott really came in with an attitude that I think is very important. And it's an attitude that's sort of being challenged now. There's this thing, the auteurs did. Now movies are all going to be made through some sort of democratic process where everybody gets their voice heard. I don't think that works. I think in a case of something like this, you can see how having too many people trying to put their ideas in, like the Walter Hill and the other producers, that actually impeded progress. It might have made things worse.
Yeah.
The studio people saying, "Oh, you can't build this set, or you're not going to spend this money on the space jockey set." Right? Why do you need a set like that? You're only going to use it for one scene, right? go without that, right? Somehow, a guy like Ridley Scott, he had the ability to convince them, no, this really is important. We must have this scene. The success of the movie hinges on it. And that power, that ability to push things through and to get things done doesn't necessarily mean you're always going to end up with a great film. And Ridley Scott's career is proof that you have great films and you can have some not so great films. Hitchcock the same way.
Right.
But it really is important to have somebody who does have a vision, to use that word that Ridley Scott says he dislikes. He doesn't like to use that word. But you do need to have somebody who says, I can see this movie. And he went so far as to actually storyboard the whole thing, even before, I think it was even before he was officially hired for the film. They paid him a certain amount. He storyboarded the whole thing. And it was when they saw his storyboards, they said, oh, yes, this can be done. And by the way, here's double the budget.
Yeah.
Now that we see what you're thinking of, we're willing to give you more money. So I really think he was important, and I think he was important in the history of film as well, for maybe not as much as Stanley Kubrick, because Stanley Kubrick really was the one that did this the first time. He was the first person to say, you can do a science fiction movie, you can do a movie about space travel, and you can make it completely convincing. Ridley Scott was smart enough to recognize that approach was just right for Alien. And as a result, you have a movie that, as you say, you can watch now and still find effective.
Oh,
yeah. Also, I think sometimes when you look at the movies that come in the aftermath of these great films, and you see how mangy they are, you can sort of say, oh, that's what it would have been like if a guy like Ridley Scott hadn't been working on it, right? I mean, Corman did a lot of Alien ripoffs. After the success of Alien, his company was churning out Star Wars ripoffs and Alien ripoffs, sometimes both, one and the same. And some of them are amusing, but they're, in comparison to Alien, there is no comparison.
I think I just have a little bit of curiosity of what a Dan O'Bannon directed Alien would have looked like.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Yeah. I think he probably would have been smart, because he seems to be kind of an eccentric fellow. I know he was suffering, apparently, even at the time, from Crohn's disease, which is a digestive problem. And some people have speculated that maybe that's where he got the idea for the chestburster, that the discomfort he was feeling, internal discomfort, may have put his mind on that path of trying to depict that on the screen. But I don't think that he would have been so unaware of his limitations that he would want it. I mean, if Ridley Scott hadn't presented himself, perhaps he would have taken a bash at it if they had allowed him to. But I have a feeling he probably had a pretty good understanding of what his limitations were. And I think if he was confronted with a guy like Ridley Scott in a film like The Duelists, he probably would have thought, yeah, probably best for him to do it.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, some of the people who worked on the technical people that worked on the film, I think including the editor, said that, actually, no, it was, I think it was Tom Skerritt who said it. Said it when he started to see the rushes, he could see how important it was to have a director that paid attention to the visual stuff, Because initially he and the other members of the cast were irritated and frustrated by the fact that Ridley Scott was working as the operator, the camera operator. So he wasn't available to them. He was always,
he done all the handheld shots.
Right. And they seemed to have, were made uncomfortable by that. But he was smart enough to know that making them uncomfortable was probably a good idea.
Yeah, I believe he also said he wanted actors that he could just let go and not have to direct the entire time. You know what I'm saying? People that knew how to get in front of the camera, perform. I don't have to really spend a lot of time with you.
Right. I certainly understand. I think anybody who's ever made a film, whatever the quality, can certainly appreciate how important it is to have people that you don't have to constantly take care of. If you can get people that have some ideas of their own, and you can just put the camera on them and you're going to get something, that certainly makes the job easier. And for somebody who's deciding to actually be the camera operator, for a director who's doing that. And if you see some of the pictures of him, not only does he have the big camera in front of him, but he also has a black hood over him so that he won't be seen in reflections. To be in that sort of cocoon, not be able to get out there with the actors and say, do this and do that, that really is a handicap. So it must have been very comforting to know that you had several people in the cast that weren't going to be constantly asking for direction. Sigourney Weaver talks about some of her feelings of inadequacy, and that might have actually been felt by other members of the cast as well. There's some members of the cast that wondered if she was really up to the job.
Yeah.
But I think she's, this is something we've spoken about. I think when we did the Silence of the Lambs episode, we were talking about great female role models in horror and science fiction films. It's really hard for me to imagine anybody beating or surpassing her, because she is exactly what you would want in that type of character. She's human, she's not unemotional, but she's competent and she's controlled, and she is reasonable, right? And there's none of the sort of baggage that you would normally see with female characters.
Yeah.
She's not interested in having a relationship with anybody. She's not chasing after anybody. She's not offering to make anybody's coffee, which is something you see even in the movie that Alien was supposedly inspired by, It, the Terror from Beyond Space, which has a couple of female members of the crew. But when the shit starts to hit the fan, the only thing that they can do is bandage people up and make coffee.
Yeah.
So in all those science fiction movies in the past, and some of them were a little ahead of their time as far as the treatment of women, just by allowing the women to participate there, I guess they were ahead of their time. But there was always this sort of arc where the women, as cold and competent and professional as they were at the start, they would always end up in the hero's arms by the end of the movie.
Yeah.
They had that bend towards just being, their ultimate goal was to be a housewife, I guess, to be married to a nice guy. You don't see that with Sigourney Weaver's character. She seems self-contained, She doesn't need anybody else to validate her or to justify her existence. And I also like the fact that they don't always make her win. She's not like an unreasonable superhero.
She's not like a super tough. Right. I'm saying? It's real. I'm saying it's like a more real character.
Right. And even in the scene, like when she confronts Ash, she really doesn't win that conversation. He's able to sort of, get it to back off. But you appreciate the fact that she made a point of it, right? That she didn't let him just go scot-free.
Yeah.
So that's all part of the idea that she is not a superhero, but she's a competent, capable person. And the fact that she's the only one that survives, I guess, is proof of her, her superiority. She doesn't let emotions govern her. And she's like all people who are in a position of command, she's willing to listen to other people and try to, benefit from their knowledge and experience. And I think you could say the same of Dallas as well. Maybe Dallas's big mistake is he didn't let her go down into that airship.
Yeah.
She volunteered to, and he said, no, I'm doing, that's where he sealed his own fate, so to speak. She's very impressive in this film. I mean, besides the fact she's a very beautiful woman.
Yeah.
But she just seems perfect for that role. And the combination of uncertainty and at the same time being competent and smart is kind of irresistible for a hero of a movie like this. But
as much as I love Aliens, every time I watch this, like when I watched this first one and it was ending, I was just like, I can't believe there are sequels. This should just end. We don't need anything, but Aliens is good, I guess.
Well,
it's different though. It's different.
That's it. I think that's the wise thing that they did was they said, we're not going to try to just replicate what was done there. It's a different type of movie. It's an action adventure movie. It's a war movie. And they're not going to try to ride on the fear of the alien, because we know we're past the point where we really can be scared by the alien anymore.
Well, it's the same. It's the same with all horror movies. Your second one has to have higher body count, more blood,
Right.
you know. So
And
that was the only way they could do this one.
Dawn of the Dead came out January 1978.
78, yeah.
So I was just a year before Alien. And Dawn of the Dead is similar in that George Romero realized that the fear factor had to have diminished from the first film, right? Because in the first film, everything's at night. We don't really know what's going on. The characters are completely confused and terrorized by what's happening. But by the second film, everybody has sort of adjusted themselves. Everybody knows what's going on.
Yeah.
And they've figured out ways to fight these zombies. And whereas in the first film, just going out the front door is like a major production, right? So you're taking your life in your hands. By the second film, they're running around amongst the zombies, knocking them over and things. And it's actually because of their sort of careless approach that they take that actually results in one of them, at least, getting too cocky and ending up getting bitten by one of the zombies. So that is an inevitable thing that has happened back with the Universal monsters as well. Once you get to know the monster, once you see the monster too clearly or completely clearly in detail, it doesn't scare us anymore. Then you have to do a different type of story.
Different, yeah.
Right? And that's what they did with Aliens. They said, okay, it's not going to be a horror movie. It's going to be an action movie. And instead of having one alien, we're going to have a bunch of aliens. And that's a clever idea. I thought it worked very well. It was very effective. It's a real crowd pleaser.
Yeah.
Alien, perhaps not as much of a crowd pleaser. It's too unsettling, and a film to really be a crowd. It's not a popcorn movie,
Yeah, I was thinking when you were talking about like Dawn of the Dead and stuff. I was thinking Alien is basically Night of the Living Dead, minus all the infighting, unless you want like your Ash character to be your Harry Cooper character.
Right.
But still kind of the same. It's kind of still kind of the same thing. Trapped in a house,
right?
Trying to get in, even though it's already in this one.
Yeah, there's certain similarities, but always the diminishment of the horror effect is what you can expect with these type of movies when you go to the second film and the third film. And I suppose it's also inevitable that as you rewatch the first film over and over again, you're going to stop really being shocked by it because it becomes second nature. Alien and Blade Runner had such a tremendous effect on all the entertainment that we watch that it's easy to see why kids today must say, what's the big deal?
Yeah.
People are going, kids are going to bed with their alien toy, snuggling up to this. And I think they had another one that was even bigger, a toy that was Hasbro would put out.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
And it made there was a bit of a fuss about it because people were saying, well, how can you sell something like that, to a child, But they did. And as soon as you start selling toys, it has to be, it's no longer really a scary monster.
Yeah.
So,
well, the Tom Skerritt scene that I mentioned where he's crawling through the vents, they basically copied that on The Simpsons.
Oh, really?
Where the janitor is trying to get a dog out of the vents. That was the way they done it. Was pretty good. Kind of takes away from the tenseness of it.
Yeah, that's right. When you see all the parodies, it's kind of hard to go back to the original film and enjoy it the same way. I guess what I think of is Ash's speech when he says, "I admire its purity." That's the way I feel about this film.
Yeah.
It has a very simple and direct story, and the things that make it fascinating and the things that make it effective are the embellishments on that simple story, right? The sets, the costumes, the characters, the monster, special effects, spaceship special effects, all of that is stuff that's been used in service of this very simple, very powerful story. And that's the perfect arrangement as far as I can see.
Yeah, I've been looking at kind of doing some other research on other things, and I guess there's a book where a guy writes about how every movie is basically the same story, and it just depends on what makes it different is your characters and all this. It's like there's only like 5 different stories that all the movies use. I can't remember exactly what all they were, but
is that the Save the Cat book?
It may have been, yeah.
I assume Save the Cat is a reference to Alien, right?
It could be. I'm not for sure.
I forget what the theory was there, that if she had not saved the cat, she would have lost the audience.
Right.
That is illogical as it may seem for a character to do that in that situation. She had to do that because the audience wouldn't have forgiven her for leaving the cat behind. As a matter of fact, anytime you introduce an animal, a pet like that, the audience is very attentive to what happens to it. Yeah. If the filmmaker forgets about it, leaves it in a burning house or whatever, the audience doesn't like that, you know, which I can understand. I mean, in a way, the cat is similar to the other characters in that it just wants to go home. It just wants to go back to bed, you know. I mean, we can all sort of sympathize. This is a movie that starts with people waking and starts and ends with the survivor going to sleep.
Going to sleep, yeah.
And they are folks who are traveling home. They've had a long day, so to speak, and they just want to get home after their work. And they get detoured into this horrifying adventure that none of them really wanted to be a part of. In a way, that's helps to make the story even more effective. Because if this was a story about a bunch of people that were going out in space to find aliens,
Yeah,
we wouldn't feel the same way about it, right? It's the sadness of it. You just think, oh, isn't that too bad? All these folks just want to get home, you know, and they have to go through all this shit. And the same is true of the cat. The cat is just like this. It just wants to go to sleep, right? It wants to find a little corner to curl up in. So the cat is important, I guess. It also, it's the impractical thing that reveals the humanity of the characters. Because the alien, as Ian Holm describes, is all about sort of pure survival instinct, just existing and reproducing.
Right.
Similar in that way to the shark in Jaws. So it's inhuman in the true sense in that it doesn't have any interest in music or literature or anything like that. It's just a thing, a biological thing, almost like mold, that it exists just to exist. And the human beings are about, I think in one scene they have Dallas sitting in the shuttle listening to classical music or something. The human beings have their other interests, right? They have a conversation around the table where Yaphet Kotto talks about what he's looking forward to eating when he gets back.
Yeah.
Right? He's not talking about food. Those other sort of trivial or frivolous things that don't have anything to do with survival, that just have to do with pursuit of happiness, that's sort of symbolized by the presence of the cat. The cat doesn't serve any function. It's just to remind the crew and the audience that these are human beings. They have a pet, right, that they care about, even though it doesn't contribute anything.
Yeah.
And it's more trouble than it's worth, and they still care about it, right? That's something that you wouldn't expect from the alien, right? The xenomorph creature is not going to be worrying about whether or not his cat is taken care of.
Yeah.
So it's important for that reason. It also brings in a little bit of color into the film, right? The orange tabby. But yeah, I don't know if these are things where the people who wrote them said, oh, it has to be this way for, you know, this reason, or if it just wasn't done on a gut level. Like they said, it feels like we need this.
Yeah.
You know? And maybe that the best movies, that's not, at least half of the decisions that are made, the artistic decisions, aren't made on the basis of somebody saying, oh, it has to be this way for a specific reason. It's just an intuitive thing. It feels right, you know. And then later you realize, oh, it's right because of all
this, yeah.
all this, yeah. So anyway, so I in answer to, I guess, your first question, I think Ridley Scott is very important to the success of the film. Dan O'Bannon is, of course, important because he's the guy that came up with the idea. And other people like, I think his name is Terry Rawlins, the editor.
Yeah.
Very important to the effectiveness of the film because he cut it in a certain way. I know they had a lot of fuss about Jerry Goldsmith's score. He was unhappy with the way they edited the score and the way they mixed the score in with the sound effects and things. They tried to downplay his music a little bit, and they replaced some parts of his music, and they actually asked him to rewrite the opening music, and he was kind of upset about that.
Right.
But I have to say, in the end, I thought the music was very effective, very memorable.
Oh, yeah.
And the use of that little piece by some other composer, I'm not familiar with the composer, but they took a piece of music for the end titles and used that rather than Jerry Goldsmith's music. And Jerry Goldsmith, I guess, was a little upset by that. But I think it was ideal, because what you want at the end of a movie like this is to be able to exhale.
Yeah.
You need something that sounds a little sweeter, and the music almost sounds like, it feels like an exhale, like, oh my God, we made it through.
Yeah.
And now we can relax, right?
Well, he got paid either way, right? Why would he care?
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying?
He might have actually gotten paid more because they used some music from his score for Freud, which was a John Huston film that had been done several years earlier. But anyway, the total package, the final film, as you say, it's just one of those instances where everything came together in the right way. And, I think it's still an extraordinary movie.
If I was going to rate it, 10 out of 10.
Yeah, I would say I can't think of anything about it that I would really want to change. And I can't think of any other film that, certainly from that time, that manages to do what it does.
Yeah, there's not one thing that I hate. There's not one thing I can set there. I can't even nitpick this movie. We do that all the time, but this one, it's the perfect movie, just about.
Right. I think so many filmmakers approach movies, and maybe this is the attitude they had to start with Alien, where you think, what's the least that we can do to get away with this? What's the least effort that we have to put into it in order to make it work, in order to be successful? And Ridley Scott took it to the next level, right? He said, I'm not going to do the least. I'm going to do the maximum. I'm going to push this into a whole other league,
So I guess you recommend people watch Alien if they've never seen it? I can't imagine no one's ever seen it, but at this point.
It is hard to imagine, yes.
I'm sure there's probably more people that are fans of Aliens and have never seen Alien.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. Aliens definitely seems to be more crowd pleasing, but Alien, I would say people should seek out, and if they do seek it out, try to find the theatrical version, the original theatrical version, without the additional scenes, and try to watch it.
Was that included? That was included on the DVD, right?
On the DVD set that I had from years ago, they call it the Alien Legacy edition. They had the theatrical version on one disc, and they had deleted scenes as a separate feature on that disc.
Okay.
The only thing I would say is a possible negative about the DVD set that I bought is that the audio is not quite as robust as I hoped it would be.
Yeah.
I'm not a real audiophile, but I remember seeing the movie in the theaters, and I remember being very impressed by the mix, the audio mix, the sound effects, and the score, and all the rest. And I didn't really get that on the DVD, but possibly on the Blu-ray. I imagine probably on the Blu-ray.
Probably fixed it, yeah.
Fixed that, yeah. So that's the last word on Alien, I guess. Definitely a must-watch if you haven't seen it.
Yep. All right. Well, this was a good episode. Can't wait to see what we're going to talk about doing next. And until next week, we will continue to watch The Good, the Bad, and the Cheaply Made.
Thanks, Gary.